Welcome everyone to this session on powerful evidence for nature-based solutions, identifying opportunities for NBS impact assessment. So what we want to do with you in this session is establish what the gaps are in impact assessment in cities for nature-based solutions. We know a lot of cities all over Europe and outside of Europe are actually struggling with this. Although a lot of cities are also actively engaged now in impact assessment for nature-based solutions. And we'd also like to take this opportunity to identify the gaps that exist in cities and the support that can be provided by NBEs, for example, by nature-based enterprises within this process of impact assessment. So I'm here with all the panelists for this session. I will just briefly introduce each of them. So we have David Tomé, who is my colleague here at the University of A Coruña, and who will take care of the chat and of the polls and of the housekeeping also of this session, of your questions and answers. I'm here also with Iwona Zwierkowska from Adam Mickiewicz University in Poland, who will tell us a bit about impact assessment in Poznan. I'm here also with Rania Sermpezi and Gillian Dick from Glasgow City Council, who are also co-leads on impact assessment in the Connecting Nature and the Connecting Nature project. I was going to say program, but it's not a program yet, it's a project. We are here also with Antonio González Prieto for the City Council of A Coruña, who is one of the cities of Connecting Nature involved in impact assessment. And finally, also very proudly joined by Mamuka Gvilava and Shushanik Asmarian from Georgia and Armenia, who are going to inform us about how impact assessment works within the ERA outside of the European Union and how we need to adapt impact assessment for those. Also, Piotr Lupa from Adam Mickiewicz University is here working with Iwona on impact assessment in Poznan. So a few housekeeping issues first, just to let you know that this session, like all the sessions for the summit, and the link will be made available. Use the chat for comments and questions, and as far as possible, we will take some of your questions and address them in the discussion bits of this session. And also provide your contact details there, as it's also very interesting to see and be able to be in touch afterwards on these very interesting topics that bring us here today. So without further ado, I would like my panelists to drop out of the session for now, and then they will be brought out of the stage, sorry, not out of the session, and they will be brought back in at particular points to talk to us about impact assessment. And I would like all of you to start with a poll. We're going to start with a poll to see what your perspective is on the impact assessment gaps that you have found in your experience in cities. And then as we move through the session, we would like to see whether your perspective changes or becomes enhanced, whether there's additional gaps and opportunities that you are able to identify as we move forward. And also, we'd like to hear your reflections a bit further down the line during this session, a bit later during this session, about the NBE opportunities that you find. So I'll ask my colleague David to bring in the poll now. Can we do that, David? Yes, so as you can see here, we have what are the impact assessment gaps in cities according to your experience. So lack of data for many indicators. Do we have a problem with the granularity and periodicity of the collected data? Are there issues of confidentiality and lack of cooperation between teams, departments, and institutions? Do we have problems with formats, with how data is stored and how data is managed? Do we have problems in terms of unsuitable measurement methods and the types of methodologies that cities might be experienced in? So please just head to the poll part of the box that you have on your right-hand side and just let us know what you think the impact assessment gaps are. And of course, feel free to elaborate further on that in the chat section also. David, do you want to come on stage, please, and show us some of the results that we've obtained?
I'm not sure if you are able to see the results now. No?
I cannot see them now. Are you able to?
Yes, I am able, so I can comment a few of them. So
yes,
the most common one with the 66% of the votes is lack of data for many indicators. This is the first one. The second one with the 26%, more or less 1 out of 4, is granularity, the scale, and the periodicity, the frequency of the collected data. And then the third one is confidentiality and lack of cooperation between teams, departments, or institutions. And the rest of them right now, they don't have both. So just these three, lack of data, granularity and periodicity, and confidentiality and lack of cooperation.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And we will be saying a lot of things about this during this session. So please chip in also on the chat whenever you feel you would like to add on the ideas. So first I will go to a short presentation on what we have done in the Connecting Nature Impact Assessment Framework with the Impact Assessment Framework within the project to actually address some of these issues and to see what we have actually found some of the same impact assessment gaps that you have mentioned here in the poll. And we will address this question again at the end of the session. What business opportunities can they generate? Can these impact assessment gaps generate? So one of the things we've done in the Connecting Nature project is that we have actually worked with the cities to co-create an evaluation and monitoring, a series of evaluation and monitoring plans by defining a Connecting Nature impact assessment framework. So a comprehensive framework that would also act as a pathway for the cities, as a process through which the cities can actually define their evaluation and monitoring strategies. The Connecting Nature Impact Assessment Framework actually has 5 steps. The first one is engaging in structured reflections on NBS impact, which we think is one of the most important stages. Choosing appropriate indicators based on this structured reflection on NBS impacts. The appropriate indicators are always related to the expected outcomes and also to the general strategic objectives that the city has. So that's why the structured reflection is such an important step before going into choosing appropriate indicators. Based on the appropriate indicators chosen, cities have developed a data plan, so have thought about the methodologies they would like to use and they will be able to use, and have developed a strategy for actually gathering and integrating the data, both the data they had available already and the data they have gathered through the Connecting Nature project. After the development of the data plan, the 4th step within the impact assessment framework is the implementation of the data plan, which is actually the concrete and practical planning of how data is going to be used and how data is going to be identified also. How do we identify available data? How do we collect new data when necessary? In what stages and with whom? And finally, the last stage is once we've actually organized all this data and integrated the data, to integrate evidence into the policy process. So a very important step here is also that data is not useful unless we can use it for the policy process in a meaningful way, so that decision making can actually be informed by the available data. So as a final result, of this co-creation process between a lot of academics in the project, so a lot of scientists who deal with different aspects and different types of impacts of nature-based solutions, and also with cities, we've come up with 5 categories of indicators, a total of 108. We have started with a much higher number. And they are also divided into core indicators, those that are important across the board and important almost across nature-based solutions types in different sites in Europe, and feature indicators who are maybe particular to a type of nature-based solutions or particularly important to a city and to cities' objectives. We have selected those that are most promising. So the core indicators are always those that are most promising and can deliver the key core data and information we need about the health and social impacts, and also about environmental and economic impacts, as we will see in a minute. As you know, by definition, nature-based solutions deliver multiple impacts. So as you can see here, we have a category of primary indicators, which basically refers to the interaction between people and nature-based solutions, so the type, frequency, duration of interaction, but also the quality of space, which is a really important aspect, as we know, of this interaction. We have health and well-being indicators and social cohesion indicators. Among the health and well-being, we have mental health and well-being. As you all know, this is a big priority now, also in the wake of the pandemic we've just been through, and we are still in to some extent. And within the social cohesion category, we look at things like bonding and bridging social capital, trust in community, perceived safety, place attachment, empowerment, and pro-environmental behavior. All of these are based on thorough reviews of existing evidence, so we know they are important impacts. We also have, as I mentioned, environmental, economic, and participatory planning and governance categories of indicators. And here we look at things like air temperature change, public green space distribution, for example, for environmental. Environmental category is a very diverse category, touches on biodiversity, touches on green space management, climate change adaptation and mitigation. The participatory planning and governance category is also quite a wide one, where we look at both the stakeholders involved, the nature of the participatory process put in place, and also the types of governance strategies and co-governance strategies that cities use. And finally, we look at some economic indicators that we find important. So the new businesses, the additional jobs created, the increase in tourism, and the public expenditure, actually, the net value of this public expenditure that is derived from NBS implementation. So through all this process, we have worked with a lot of cities in Europe, both frontrunner, both cities that are very experienced and cities that are not so experienced. And we have found a series of impact assessment gaps, some of which you've touched upon in the poll before. On the one hand, one of the most important ones maybe was the lack of a theory of change. So that's why we had this step of a structured reflection to define the relationship between objectives, expected outcomes, and indicators. Because when the theory of change is clear, it is very easy, in our view, to then choose appropriate indicators. We also found the fear of assessment-related resource intensiveness. So depending on the methodologies used and on the kinds of data available, sometimes doing good monitoring and evaluation is resource intensive. So cities were a bit afraid of not having the adequate resources for that. Another gap we found is establishing suitability of some indicators to measure NBS impacts depending on scale and the existing methodologies and technologies available in the city. So sometimes the expertise for establishing the suitability was missing, lack of available data to establish a baseline. Sometimes the contact with public administrations, different organizations, or people who have data of interest was not very easy. And Rania and Gillian will tell us about a bit more about this a bit later on in this session. And finally, there was sometimes a lack of internal capacity to collect and analyze data or represent results spatially, which we will see is very important also when we want to make decisions based on impact data. So all of these have opportunities. All of these gaps are also associated, as it's easily visible here, to opportunities. That and finally, I would just like to mention that, as you might already be aware, the many projects that have been solutions have gathered together and put and created the European Handbook of Indicators, where we now have a great set of common indicators and methods for assessing the performance and impact on different types of MBS. The handbook is designed in such a way to cover a wide variety of geographic areas and at different scales, and it tackles 12 key societal challenge areas through its indicators. So we highly encourage you to check the handbook and make use of it in your monitoring and evaluation plans, either as a city, as an academic, or as an organization or citizen group that is involved in impact assessment. Okay, so with this in mind, I would like us now to go to another presentation by my colleague Iwona Zwierkowska, who will show us how these indicators actually work in practice. So what happens when we use this framework to assess nature-based solutions, in this case, in the city of Poznan. So Iwona, could you please come onto the stage?
Yes, thank you, Adina. I will just share my screen in a second. Yeah, hope you can see the presentation already. I don't hear any no, so I hope it's yes, visible. Perfect. Okay, so thank you and good morning, everybody. My name is Iwona Zwierkowska, and I represent Adam Mickiewicz University, which is the academic partner in Connecting Nature project. So we are involved in monitoring and assessment of nature-based solutions developed in Poznan, and these are natural-oriented playgrounds in kindergartens and the pocket parks. We are involved in environmental, social, and economic impact of those nature-based solutions. However, I will not go through the whole plan. I will just focus on 3 selected items that I think they will show the complexity of work and the opportunities behind the monitoring of nature-based solution. So in the heart of the monitoring, there is, of course, data. So we start our work searching for relevant data that will help us to monitor nature-based solution implemented and in its impact implemented in Poznan. So first of all, we've been using local resources from the Spatial Information System of Poznan run by the GeoPoz. This is a database that is developed on ongoing basis. So through the lasting of the Connecting Nature project, like new data layer were also appearing there. Apart from it, we've been using other resources such as topographical maps in a digital format available for Poland, and also external repositories such as Earth Explorer of the United States Geological Survey that allow us to access, for example, Landsat 8 thermal satellite images. Of course, we've been using also other sources, but I think that's that shows the variety of possibilities that we have. So I will focus in my presentation on 3 topics. The first one is monitoring of green space distribution in the city. The second is the impact of the reducing temperature. And the third one is the calculation of ecosystem services. So let's start with the green space distribution. So in the middle of the slide, you can see the sample of available for Poland digital topographical maps. That is in the geometric resolution of 1 to 10,000. So with such a resources, we can monitoring the relation between built-up area and the green infrastructure at the city scale and also at the lower administrative units. But if we want to capture such a side-scale changes like pocket parks, like nature-oriented playgrounds in kindergartens, this data is not able to show us these differences. Therefore, at the side scale, we decided to conduct the side-scale mapping that will capture detailed land cover, including different types of green spaces, such as street trees, green walls, lawns, flower beds, and the hedges. And such a data will allow us to calculate urban green factor for selected location in Poznań. And you need to know that in the Polish planning system, we use very basic indicators, which is called a share of biologically active surface, that is not taking into account the planning process, the type of green spaces or the quality of green places of the green spaces involved in the planning. So we are making step forward to capture the small-scale solution that improve the quality of the space. The second theme that we focus in the environmental monitoring that we conduct is the impact of the temperature reduction through implementation of nature-based solution. So on the right-hand side, you can see the results of analysis of Landsat 8 thermal data that shows the differences in the surface temperature in Poznań that reflects the green infrastructure in the city of Poznań. So you can see this blue-green cross that cut the city, and this is our main green system of the city. But you can also see the red heart of the city, which represents the historical center and the very dense tenant houses. So the case studies of the implemented nature-based solution in Poznań are located in this heart of the city. So you can see in the middle picture, like the black crosses, that shows the thermal profile that we mark in the location of those nature-based solution. And one of the examples you can see on the left side, this is the example of nature-oriented playground in one of the kindergartens. And if you follow the thermal profile and the chart below, you can see that there are differences of approximately 2 Celsius degrees between those natural-oriented playgrounds and the surrounding built-up areas. But again, we have ambition to capture the local differences in the temperature that might be impacted by design, material used for developing nature-based solution. Therefore, we implemented the pilot measurement at the site scale with the usage of the equipment such as meteorological station, mobile air temperature and humidity sensor, and thermal camera. So we hope to capture very detailed differences in the temperature that we can shape by design and by material use. We started the thermal monitoring in a full range this spring, so we hope to have analysis ready in autumn, but I will just show you some sample of the results that we have that shows the impact, for example, of the tree shade on surface temperature, and also you can see how different land cover also impacts the surface temperature on the ground. With analyzing this data together with the air temperature data, we aim to have results that will give us good guidance how to better plan nature-based solution that will be able to reduce the temperature to the highest possible level. The last example that I want to share with you is the example of calculation of ecosystem services provided by trees in one of the pocket park in Poznań at the Kolejowa Street. This is a small pocket park with 108 trees. We've been collecting very detailed measurements of the tree characteristic together with my colleague Piotr, and we took this data together with the data about precipitation and the quality of air, and we use those data as an input to the free available software called iTree that allowed us to generate results and see how this small pocket park contributes to the carbon storage and sequestration, oxygen production, avoid runoff, and hopefully soon we're gonna have a results about the air pollution removal. So That's just a very small sample of what we do, but I hope it shows you the great value of the science-practice collaboration in discovering the impact of nature-based solutions that are implemented in the city. It also shows the great opportunity for developing data, especially at the site scale, which is, even though we have a quite rich data sets in Poznań and they are developing very fast, the site scale data are still missing. So, for example, tree database for Poznań would be of a great value also to monitor the changes in ecosystem service provision and other indicators. And I think that that's opening the discussion for further, so I will end up at this stage. So thank you very much, and if there will be any question, I will be happy to answer.
Very much, Ivona. I think this is a really, really good example of the importance of doing evaluation at the site scale and also in small scale projects, you know, such as pocket parks and natural playgrounds. Also, it showcases a solution such as natural playgrounds that is particular to a social group that's also sometimes lacking in sufficient evidence, which are children in this case, right? So these are very beautiful examples of how we can do that on the site scale. If there's any questions, please put them in the chat. And we'd like to ask the audience now, while we also bring up the next speakers also, is based on what Ivona just presented, how do you see the, if there's any representatives on NBEs in the audience, how do you see the business opportunities also in the presented gaps and in the presented study and process of gathering data at the site scale that Ivona just talked about, and how can you possibly help cities to form these synergistic collaborations that they need in order to do meaningful impact evaluation. So just put your ideas in the chat as well, and I will bring up now Rania Sempezi from the city of Glasgow to tell us a little bit about her perspective on what the gaps and business opportunities are when it comes to impact assessment, maybe especially the gaps, because I know you've been also fighting with that a lot, Rania. So Rania is a GIS expert officer in Glasgow City Council, and Glasgow is one of our front-runner cities. As very on the other end of the spectrum, Glasgow is actually doing an impact, it's using an impact evaluations framework and an impact assessment at the whole city scale, right? So they're evaluating their open space strategy, which is the opposite scale as the one Ivona just presented. So please go ahead, Rania.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so that looks like it's working. Yeah, I was just going to go through some of the challenges that we have faced in terms of data, very similar to the kind of poll that we've already gone through. Like I mentioned before, one of the main things is granularity and confidentiality, and these are obviously interlinked in that scale of the data depends on how confidential it is as well. And in terms of granularity, I think the main kind of examples we've had is around economic or environmental data that maybe they're available at city scale, like you were saying before, Ivona and Andina, and they're not really available in the kind of side scale that you might be interested in. So apart from the open space strategy, we're also looking at two other smaller exemplars that the kind of environmental and economic data that's available at city scale, it's just not usable for us. And then in terms of confidentiality, this is mainly around health data that's again available at city scale, and then when you're looking at getting it at a more kind of neighborhood level, that's quite hard to get, and that's to avoid releasing any personal information. So then the next thing I wanted to talk to you about was the periodicity and how again I would say that the most common one for us has been health data. It's difficult to find data that's available at the kind of time frame that you're looking for. There's always a 2 or 3 year lag at publishing data, and that could be hiding temporal trends. There's examples of that in environmental data that we have tried to get as well. with surveys rarely being repeated. So maybe there was some sort of funding that caused this one survey to get commissioned, and then the funding just doesn't come back, so you don't get that baseline and then follow through with data. The other thing I was going to talk about is the collaboration between local governments, so councils in this case, health institutions, and even the local government itself, so between teams and different institutions. And that's because we rarely know who deals with what, even within the same local government place. And this has been a barrier for us because of everyone working in their own silos and thinking that the data that they produce or collect is only relevant for their uses. So I was going to say that the other thing, which is maybe not so major, but it's data formats, and it's around data being hidden in PDF reports or PDF maps that are hard to then turn into actual data. And I guess the main thing to say here is collaboration is really essential. And I think that's where I guess the business opportunity comes in as well, because we're looking at how businesses could help with that kind of collaboration, could establish maybe relationships between institutions that are not usually speaking to each other. I know that there are businesses who are already have established relationships with other departments, and therefore they're able to just basically connect us. There's also the aspect of, I guess, in Connecting Nature and in Glasgow, we have a designated person who's dealing with the data aspect. However, there are a lot of other institutions and organizations that don't have that kind of person. And when they don't, I guess the business opportunity would be for someone externally to be able to provide a product that's going to be easy for everyone to use, that doesn't require that kind of technical knowledge to deploy and to use. So things like bespoke products, such as dashboards that are easily accessible. So I think that's the main business opportunities from my perspective. It's around making the connections and doing any sort of data collection, analysis, and visualization that may be needed. So I think that's it from me, Adina. Any questions, please let me know.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rani. Of the kinds of difficulties that we see cities facing when dealing with impact assessment of nature-based solutions. And I like the emphasis on collaboration. That's really important, starting from the different organizations that are actually the custodians of data, and maybe also having a sort of a review of what data is available at the city level and at the regional level in many cases. So I was wondering whether also in the audience, some of you have faced the same, and how have you handled them in general when you face these difficulties in collaboration, maybe difficulties in finding data or data that is in formats that are not usable or not easy to integrate with other sources of data. So I'd like now to bring up Antonio González Prieto from the city of A Coruña, also a city involved in the Connecting Nature project. It's also the city I am in. I actually forgot to introduce myself at the beginning. So I'm Adina Dumitru. I work at the University of A Coruña, and I'm a health and environmental psychologist, leading together with Glasgow the impact assessment framework in Connecting Nature. I'm very also pleased to present Antonio, who works with the City Council. He's an architect and urban planner, and is in charge within the Connecting Nature project of the exemplar of the city of Coruña, which is a network of urban gardens that have been implemented in the city. I'd like to ask you, Antonio, how has this process of implementation been? What gaps and opportunities, again, you have found along the way? And what are the plans for collecting impact evidence? So please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Adina. Let me share my... briefly is our exemplar and the work we are developing here in the city of A Coruña. Our exemplar is developing a citywide network of urban gardens to work new and more ambitious green infrastructure. On the left side, you see the situation, the different initiatives going on from each other. And on the right side, you can see what we foresee in the future with urban gardens multiplying, creating, and expanding. It's connecting the. You can see here some of these examples, like the school gardens for citizens, the community gardens where NGOs and associations are working, vulnerable collectives like migrants or gender-based victims. Also, some impact of the new start to build during the next framework. Some of the key transformation points, like, for example, the interdepartmental work, the connection with other projects, and also the prize that we won for our exemplar, which was recognized at the national level as best local practice for climate in the category of native aid. And then we have also had assessment tools in 3 phases of the framework. And this is because we see the selection of indicators and the collection of relevant data as a fundamental step in our process. To prove that these benefits that we keep speaking of are not just theoretical, but rather that nature-based urban gardens in particular on city and on citizens' lives. In order to select the right indicator, and for our exemplar, working very closely with Adina and David and the rest of our colleagues from the university, because we are lucky enough to have them really in our. And we have been analyzing the data available and the data that we need to collect from scratch. In indicators, for example, this has a number of meteorological stations distributed around, and we managed to relocate one of these stations to one of the urban gardens, expecting that this will give us very like air temperature, humidity, and wind. With regards levels, the city council has mathematical models which are very accurate. We have information in real time and air quality city, and we are able to obtain data for the urban gardens quite easily. In terms of biodiversity of the city, which with level of granularity, this map is also accessible in a GIS format. Actually, we discovered that a lot of GIS data that is not necessarily organized in a user-friendly way, but we are in contact with the relevant department to access the data and include it in our. Also, other indicators, like for example, to capture, we are doing estimations based on the type of species plants and the species, and also for considering implementing low-cost sensors in some of the urban gardens. Well-being and social data, in contact with school associations to collect data, surveys, and this will bring us a lot of valuable data on different indicators, destination, attachment, trust in community, diseases, and levels of mental health and well-being. In terms of economic impact, we have some data on the number of jobs created by gardens, and this is relevant in our city because the city council organized for unemployed people on urban gardening, so we have some impact, and also data on new enterprises and SMEs related to the topic. We have of the participatory process that led to the creation of the urban gardens. So right now, we are in the middle of the process of putting together all this information And we're definitely very excited to see the results of this inter-assessment process. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Antonio. I think this is really interesting, and it's also one of the things you mentioned, which is that you found out that you had much more data than you thought was available at the beginning. I think is the case in many cities, which is both good and bad news, right? On the one hand, is good news because we have data and we start knowing about it. Maybe the bad news is we need better systems to be aware of the data available and to integrate it across different objectives and priorities.
Definitely.
Yeah, so thank you very much. If you have any questions for Antonio, also please put them in the chat. And I'll now ask Mamoka Vilava and Susanika Asmarian to come on the stage to tell us a little bit about impact assessment in Georgia and Armenia and how they might have been able to use some of these indicators, and also which ones might have needed adaptations to different contexts, such as the ones they are representing. So please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Adina. I would like to, I'm pleased to present this together with Shushanik Asmarian. You will have two small presentations. I would like to share experience first with applying the experience with impact assessment framework to integrate NBS in urban planning on an example of a city of Kutaisi. Geographic was established in '98. We registered recently at European NBS Enterprise Platform, and one of the solutions we offer there is how to integrate NBS into urban planning. Our innovation proposes to utilize NBS impact assessment framework as part of the strategic environmental assessment, or SEA, for spatial plans. In case of Kutaisi, we specified NBS in its planning concept at the strategic environmental assessment scoping stage, applying first 3 blocks of the impact assessment framework, nicely presented by Adina. Scoping the requirements, including those of NBS, will be mandatory for master plan when it will be developed in this process. And for the final stage, we propose to apply blocks 4 and 5 in the framework. This slide illustrates planning objectives of Kutaisi and NBS context, related to them with SDGs, even checking how COVID-proof these objectives are. NBS scoping specified a full set of indicators for Kutaisi master plan, illustrating at scoping stage approach with 2 important indicators. Land surface temperature time series with 30-meter resolution shows that loss of wetlands in 2020 increased the temperature at this site in the city by staggering 10 degrees. Same site is analyzed with the time series of vegetation index as an indicator of a loss of wetland and its vegetation in comparison with the neighboring spot. Green spaces measured remotely can indeed also serve as an excellent NBS indicator, with data freely available and easily accessible in 10-meter resolution straight from the scratch. You can see this difference made by the wetland loss in the city. On this last slide, let me share the city view from 11th century Baghrati Cathedral, welcoming you to Kutaisi and Georgia when life is better. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think that was very interesting. Also, a time series is one of my favorite ways also of analyzing, gathering, analyzing, and then interpreting data also, because you can see trends over time, which is really interesting. So thank you.
Yes, people don't know where to find it, and it's quite easy to find, and it's quite easy to analyze 40 years of data with 30-meter resolution. You just need a couple of clicks in the internet. Not that easy, but not difficult also.
Yes, and that's again an opportunity, right? There's a business opportunity right there. All these sources of data that can be used at the city level that could be brought into bear on indicators and objectives that cities have.
oh, we like this as an opportunity because we are frequently doing the spatial planning and we now know how to integrate NBS into the city planning. That means that's another business opportunity for us. We already specified this for one major city, and I'm personally doing this for another project in one small coastal city. So opportunities are there, definitely.
Yes, yes. Thank you very much, Mamuka. Shushanik, go ahead, please. Shushanik Asmarian from Armenia, from the National Academy of Environmental Sciences in Armenia.
Thank you. Thank you, Adina. I've tried to be quite short, but I will start to share. I would like to share the experience of the Center for Ecological Noosphere Studies sense on how geospatial technologies can be applied as a tool for assessing urban thermal conditions and guiding on NBS development and impact assessment for Yerevan. First, a few words about SENS. SENS is one of the research institutions of the National Academy of Sciences of Armenia, which engages fundamental and applied studies and providing different types of services on research, consulting, monitoring, testing, etc. in ecology, environment, agriculture, and food safety using geospatial, GIS, and remote sensing technologies. Slide, please. In 2007 and 2008, SENS initiated a nature-based solution called Target Tree Planting Program for Yerevan municipality, aimed to investigate the urban air, soil, and plant pollution, identify gas and dust-resistant and metal-accumulating species of plants, and provide a set of tree and shrub species to be planted in Yerevan parks and squares based on the type and level of pollution of each urban site. Now the municipality is implementing consistently the program, planting the species provided by SENS team. This slide illustrates, now the previous slide please, it illustrates the proposed NBS relevant strategic objectives of Yerevan and the links with United States Sustainable Development Goals. They are good health and well-being, sustainable cities and communities, climate action, and life on land. Slide please. SENS developed a method of monitoring the urban land surface temperature and the level of urban thermal comfort using geospatial technologies, in particular satellite and UAV remote sensing, and provides the tool for assessing urban thermal conditions and guiding on NBS development. Next slide, please. The NBS Target Tree Planting Program was oriented to improve urban ecological conditions in Yerevan, and in particular the thermal one. And the Urban Thermal Field Variance Index, UTFVI, was used for this purpose, which reflects and quantitatively describes the urban heat island effect on the ecological comfort level of cities, and so remains a good tool for assessing the spatial and temporal changes of urban thermal comfort in Yerevan. The next slide, please. Briefly, SENS investigations shows that UTFVI can be easily used for assessing the direct impact of the planting program on the urban thermal comfort. I should say, Mamuka, the previous slide, please. Okay, the details of these studies, investigations can be reached via link provided on the slide. Next slide, please. It is in a short, and this is a small part of the work which we have been conducting, and what we are trying now to do is to try to use these technologies to assess first of all the air quality in Yerevan, and also to try to provide the special temporal picture, the changes, and monitor this process in order to provide scientifically justified data for decision makers to our local communities. And also, this is in the end a great opportunity to have the marvelous views in the previous slide on the Armenian symbol, the biblical mountain of Ararat. Thank you, and I'm ready to answer to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shushanik. I think that also illustrates the sort of the challenges and opportunities related to very, very old cities, right? You have the city of Yerevan, who's been around for 2,800 years, so that's a long time, and I think that's something that is also interesting, in terms of cultural and natural heritage and how that has changed over time. So before we move on to some reflections, I would like to ask a question that was formulated by Hazel, and also ask Ivona. I think also you can come on the stage for this question. I think it's something that it's also interesting for you and Shushanik and Mamuka maybe, which is the question is by Hazel, who asks about how to evaluate the ecosystem services provided by newly planted trees within an NBS intervention. Because the evidence shows that the ecosystem services provided by young trees is low relative to mature trees. So how can we account for this when reporting the environmental impacts of an intervention when under a constricted time frame, as all our projects are? This is part of the challenge we're facing. So if you have any ideas on that, please go ahead.
Yeah, so if I can take a stage to answer this question. Definitely, we are aware of this, that the smaller, younger trees provide also less ecosystem services. However, if we are introducing the trees into the area that was not previously green, then definitely we still can measure the increase in ecosystem service provision, but by those young trees. We also have to take into account that the trees will still be there beyond the lasting of the project. So with their development, the ecosystem services will also increase. So we also have to take this into account and have in mind that this is the long-lasting intervention, and we should not just stop measuring and looking within the project time frame at such a nature-based solution. And I think there is also another issue that is worth to mention, is that once the local authorities, the cities, are implementing new green spaces with trees, then they also can formulate the requirements for the trees. And many of the cities is doing that, stating the minimum requirements of the age of the trees or the size of the trees, that at the very beginning provide the ecosystem services at a certain level. Opposite situation is when we, for example, implement intervention that required some previous tree cutting, and then the preservation of the mature trees should be the priority in any case, and then there is no, of course, no chance to replace the value of the mature tree with the young plantings. So thank you. That's all from what I would like to add.
Thank you very much, Ivona. Maybe Shushanik, and then
from my side, thank you very much. I totally agree with Ivona, and just nothing to add, because Ivona provided comprehensive answer. Just to state that we should be quite patient, because it is continuous process and really requires time to have these young trees planted, and then day by day, year by year, we will try to follow and to try to keep track how these small trees becomes a big one, and then to develop a methodology of assessing these services, because you should have a scientifically based methodology in order to assess these services.
Yes, I just agree. And the interesting thing in an impact assessment framework is that you don't start with the planting the trees. So you start with the what you want to get, and then you select the indicators. It sounds difficult, but it's really sometimes easy. I demonstrated. You immediately can measure the temperature and NDVI, which is the vegetation index. So start with that, set up how you measure and then decide whether you cut the old trees. This happens also in the cities, or plant the new trees, the seedlings. Therefore, yes, impact assessment framework has this paradigm change. So agree on objectives and set up your indicators, and then select your solutions.
I think that's an important point, because we sometimes start with the other way around. We think, what data do I have available, and what kinds of indicators are easy to get, and do I have the resources for, before I start with the objectives. And we always recommend you start with the objectives and you map the pathways to those objectives, and then you can choose your indicators. Okay, thank you very much. I want to bring now Rania and Gillian as well. Gillian's already here. Gillian is also a very veteran urban planner at the city of Glasgow with a lot of expertise, and she's a tireless advocate for nature-based solutions and for coalitions, which is really important in this context, with the coalitions with different organizations and different actors. So I'd like you to reflect, both Gillian and Rania, on the unexpected coalitions and key learnings to link evidence gathering with within these external collaborations. So the collaborations you've managed to establish, the difficulties you had with that, and also reflect on how this collaboration then has as an outcome the Glasgow integrated dashboard that can provide us with spatially explicit data on what goes on in the city in terms of the impacts of nature-based solutions.
So if I start, and then I'll pass the baton to Rania, because that's what I tend to do, is I tend to, I take every opportunity we can get. So I mention the dashboard all the time. I mention that we're looking for data. I say we're looking to tell the stories. I try and explain why we're talking things. I've also started saying to people that we're doing a place-based approach with a nature-based solutions frame or lens or focus, whatever suits their words. And I've also done a bit of a translation saying we're looking at being able to holistically say, is any action or thing that we're doing going to do no harm to social cohesion, health and well-being, environment, economic and biodiversity all at the same time. That means that when I talk about that, I suddenly get people coming back who go, oh, would you like our data? At which point Rania is banging her head against the brick wall, because she's been trying to get through to them for a year, 2 years or 3 years. And they've been ignoring us because they didn't think their data was relevant. So sometimes we have to go out with the organization and come back in. But the 2 years of tireless work that we've done since Rania's landed, and we've had somebody dedicated to it, although we did have a GIS person before, but she was dealing with huge amounts of data, has actually opened up conversations with our corporate GIS people, and they have now become supporters rather than seeing us as opposition or barriers or blockers. So at this point, I'm going to pass the baton to Rania, because she can explain some of the collaborations and conversations that have come out of that kind of thing, and me going, we need your data, and going, Rania, here's somebody else that can help you.
Yeah, just very quickly, I know we're almost at the end of the session. Gillian mentioned before the corporate data team. So this has been an eye-opener for us, because we've been able through that to get some health data that we wouldn't have been able to get before at kind of neighborhood level. And it's been really useful for us. And also through that, we have also connected with one of the universities here in Glasgow. They're doing this mobility study. So they're looking at how our city is being used from GPS tracking data. And we thought that would be amazing to incorporate into the open space strategy planning and the work that we're doing. So I guess, yes, collaboration is key, and just insisting and going into different meetings until you find the person who's going to give you the data that you need. So that's that for me.
Much, Rania. I think you also came across social cohesion data that was really interesting. It's hard to come by sometimes in cities, at least on the indicators that we were interested in and that were important.
The other thing to say very quickly, Adina, is actually having the conversations you guys has inspired us to think about different ways to get that social cohesion data. And it means that we can have conversations with people and say, well, if you did that survey that you're going to do anyway, can we capture it spatially? Because if we can capture it spatially, it gives us that social cohesion data. So some of it's about, and there's been some kind of brick walls we've hit where we've thought somebody's collecting the right data, and we've gone, we can help you capture it spatially, and then we've discovered they aren't. But that even makes them think about how they ask the questions going forward, and can that information be used by somebody else? So hopefully what we're doing is stopping people collecting data for one subject and kind of sticking it in a tiny box and actually opening it up. And if we can start getting people to think about it spatially and think about it as a way of capturing photos or lived experience or all of that, then we'll start to get a more rich data source, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think one of the key takeaways also, Gillian, from this is that actually using existing opportunities is really important, and connecting and collaborating with all kinds of actors also that have data, the ones that are interested in data, universities that are doing studies that have nothing to do with your initial objectives, but that then have interesting synergies is really important in this. So just speak to as many people as possible and you will find the data, and use the experts that you have either in-house or in universities to guide you through this process. So I think that's an important key takeaway. So thank you very much, everyone, for this very interesting session, for attending and for interacting with us on the chat. Please, we'll just leave the chat open for a few minutes more, just so that you can share either your contact details or any other resources that you find useful. Also thoughts on any thoughts you might have on the difficulties that you've experienced, and see you in the next sessions of this summit. Thank you very much.